He stood on the ruined land he'd inherited from a stranger, staring at a burned-out foundation, fallen walls, and weeds swallowing what once was a home. His worn backpack carried everything he had left. His German shepherd limped beside him, and he had nowhere else to go. Yet somehow, this ruined place felt like the first door God had opened for him in years. Before we begin, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. A dry wind whispered across the cracked hills of central Texas, stirring dust along the forgotten road beneath a pale noonday sun. Ethan Walker trudged forward, each footstep slow, almost reluctant, as if the earth itself resisted him. His boots, once sturdy military issue, were now worn smooth. Dust clung to his jeans, to the faded olive t-shirt, to the sweat-darkened bandana wrapped around his wrist. His face, tanned and deeply lined, held the quiet fatigue of a man who had seen too much and expected nothing. A few days' stubble bristled across his angular jaw, and silver streaks threaded through the mess of brown hair falling across his brow. Valor, his 4-year-old German shepherd, trotted close beside him, tall, proud, but limping on his right hind leg. The dog's fur was black with a white collar and paws, and his amber eyes were always scanning, always watching, as if guarding Ethan from ghosts no one else could see. Ethan had not spoken to another human in weeks. He rarely needed to. The world had gone quiet since the war, since the loss, since the years on the streets had carved silence into his bones. But that morning, something had cracked that silence, a phone call from a lawyer in Austin, telling him he'd inherited 50 acres of land from a woman named Ruby Dawson, a name he'd never heard. He didn't ask questions. There was nothing left to lose. He hadn't owned anything in years. Not a home, not a family, not even a mailing address. Just valor. And now, apparently, a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. The journey to hill country took 2 days on foot, across barren back roads and forgotten intersections. As they neared the coordinates the lawyer had emailed, the landscape shifted. Dust gave way to dry grass, patches of mesquite and scrub oak, and the ghost of what had once been a ranch. The gate was gone. The gravel path was mostly overgrown. But the land still breathed, faintly, like an old lung. It was wide, open, quiet. In the center stood the remains of a house, stone foundation, a half-collapsed chimney, and scorched timbers eaten by time. Ethan stared at it for a long time, squinting against the sun. Ruby Dawson had lived here once. He tried to picture her. Old, maybe? A widow? A rancher? Why him? Why this land? Valor moved ahead, nose low, ears perked, tail stiff. Ethan followed the dog's lead to a crumbling barn still standing a few yards away, its walls warped but intact. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay, dry rot, and sun-baked wood. Motes danced in the light streaming through a broken slat. Ethan crouched beside a stall, brushing aside debris. Valor let out a soft growl, then nosed at a section of the floor. Something about the pattern of the boards looked wrong. Ethan tapped them with his boot. Hollow. There, beneath the warped boards, lay a rusted iron latch. He hesitated, then pulled. The floor creaked open to reveal a narrow wooden staircase, descending into cool earth. The air that rose from below was damp and still. Valor whined, shifting nervously. Ethan lit the old flashlight hanging from his belt. He descended carefully. The steps groaned under his weight. At the bottom he found a space no larger than a root cellar, but tidy, preserved. A table, a tin lantern, and a wooden chest, locked but old. He pried it open with a rusted crowbar, heart hammering like it hadn't in years. Inside lay stacks of notebooks, military patches, yellowed photographs, and at the very top, a leather-bound journal with one name on the cover, Ruby Dawson. He turned to the first page. Her handwriting was strong, confident. A nurse in the war. Stories of blood, of sand, of losing soldiers she couldn't save, of the quiet after, of the loneliness. And then, halfway down the third entry, a line that stopped his breath. There was a boy I saw once during a storm at the field hospital. He had eyes like mine, angry, alone, burning for something he couldn't name. I never forgot him. I hope he survived. Ethan sat still for a long while. Was it him? Could she have remembered him after all this time? He couldn't recall her face, but something deep in his chest stirred, a memory of eyes behind a bloodied mask, whispering to him as mortars shook the night. He didn't know why, but he felt it. Ruby had brought him here for a reason. Behind him, Valor nosed around the cellar's far wall. The dog's claws scraped at something soft, earth disturbed. And there, half buried beneath a tarp, was an old canvas satchel. Inside, a folded map, hand-drawn. The land, the hills, a circled X near a dried-up creek labeled Apple Tree, 1903. Another mark labeled Old Well, and a third under the barn itself. Tools buried here. Ethan leaned against the wall, the journal in his lap, the map spread at his feet. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost, just tired, and something else. A quiet ember of purpose flickering in the dust. Tomorrow he would dig. The heat still hung heavy the next morning, casting long shadows across the bone-dry land. Ethan stirred from a shallow sleep beneath the lean-to roof of the ruined barn. Valor was already awake, sitting near the doorway, ears forward, his injured leg tucked close. The silence around them was thick, no passing cars, no distant chatter, just the slow breathing of the earth and the occasional screech of a hawk riding the thermal winds above. They spent the morning clearing debris from the barn. Splintered planks, rusted horsetack, a broken saddle twisted under a collapsed beam. It was hard labor under a punishing sun, but Ethan welcomed it. He needed something to do with his hands, something to fight against besides memories. By noon, they had uncovered more of the floor, worn but sturdy, and the area where Valor had found the hidden cellar door. Ethan tied a rope to a post and secured it down the stairs, then descended once more into the darkness. He spent hours sifting through. Ruby's old storage room, uncovering canning jars, tools wrapped in oilskin, faded letters, and another notebook marked simply, horses. Ruby's script described each animal like they were family, with gentle affection and unspoken sorrow. There were no mentions of human kin, not until the final page. If no one claims the land, let it find its way to the boy I saw. Even if I imagined him, I owe him that. That evening, needing supplies and perhaps answers, Ethan made his way into town. Marble Creek. It was a modest place built around a single main street, with storefronts painted in cheerful but faded pastels. An old gas station, a diner, a post office, and a general store stood like old friends who'd seen better days. Valor limped behind him, tail low, but eyes alert. The bell above the general store jingled as Ethan entered. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of cedar chips and old tobacco. Behind the counter stood a tall, lean woman in her mid-50s, with short, salt-and-pepper hair and deep-set hazel eyes that flicked up from a paperback. She wore a faded denim shirt tucked into worn jeans, a leather belt cinched tight, and bore a silver ring with a turquoise stone. "You're not from around here," she said, voice low and steady. "Just passing through," Ethan replied, setting a can of coffee and a roll of bandages on the counter. "Looking into the old Dawson ranch." At the word Dawson, her gaze sharpened. "Ruby?" He nodded. The woman hesitated. "I'm Sarah McKee. Used to bring her grain once a month before she passed. Ruby didn't talk much, but she wasn't mean. Just broken in a quiet way. After her barn caught fire 10 years ago, she never rebuilt the house. Slept in the tack room with her horses till the day she didn't wake up. Ethan absorbed the words. Any family? Sarah shook her head. Not that she ever said. Some folks said she lost a man in the war. Never confirmed. But she kept to herself. Good with horses. Better with them than people, maybe. As Ethan paid, she glanced at Valor. Your dog okay? Injured. Old bullet wound flaring up again. Vet comes in Fridays, Sarah said, almost as an offering. Name's Dr. Carter. You'll like her? Back at the ranch, Ethan sat outside the barn with Valor's head resting in his lap. He looked out across the land, at the lonely fence lines, the dried creek, the horizon smeared with dusk. Somewhere in this dust lay more than bones. Maybe a reason, maybe forgiveness, maybe just the last whisper of a woman who remembered a boy once forgotten. Tomorrow he'd follow the first mark on the map. The sun had barely crested the hills when Ethan descended once more into the cellar. The air remained cool and damp, a stark contrast to the heat curling above ground. He knelt beside the wooden crates and rusted shelves, brushing aside layers of dust as Valor lay near the opening, head on paws, watching. Ethan's fingers landed on a tightly bound bundle, wrapped in stiff oilskin and wedged behind a collapsed beam. The fabric peeled away with effort, revealing a worn leather journal, its spine cracked and corners softened by age. He opened it cautiously. The first page bore a name written in looping, deliberate script, Ruby Dawson. The entries were uneven, some pages barely filled, others written in a rush of emotion. Ruby's words spilled with startling clarity, recollections of battlefield clinics, of tending to shattered limbs and hollow eyes. She described her years as a field nurse, stationed in desert heat and jungle rot, watching men fall as quickly as they smiled. The journal didn't romanticize war, it laid bare its toll. I once held a boy's hand as he cried for his mother, one passage read. But the boy that stayed with me most was different, not crying, just lost, staring past everything. I gave him my water, and he blinked like waking from death. He had eyes the color of dust and despair. I never learned his name, but I never forgot his face. Ethan paused. The words crawled beneath his skin. That moment, he remembered it. He had been 19, barely conscious, shot through the shoulder during a patrol in Fallujah. Someone had crouched beside him, held his wrist, whispered calm into the noise. He thought he'd imagined her. Valor shifted behind him, letting out a low, brief sound. Ethan turned. The dog had his paw on a corner of the earthen floor where the packed soil curved unevenly. Slowly, carefully, Valor began to dig. Dirt flew in gentle arcs, and within minutes the edge of a buried cloth emerged. Ethan helped clear it, unwrapping a second bundle from beneath the cellar floor. Inside lay a folded parchment map, yellowed and ink-stained, along with 3 rusted iron tools, an old hand rake, pruning shears, and a small shovel, each bearing Ruby's initials carved near the handle. The map showed the ranch's layout before the fire. 3 spots were marked in red, one labeled Old Well, another Family Tree, and the last Tool Cellar. He traced his fingers over the family tree mark and noted the sketch beside it, an apple tree with looping roots planted generations ago. The map had been hidden like a secret handed down, perhaps never meant to be found by strangers. But Ethan wasn't a stranger anymore. Ruby had remembered him, had written about him. He spent the next hour cataloging everything. The tools were worn but functional. The parchment, though fragile, remained legible. He laid it out on a makeshift table of crates and kept the journal close. Back above ground, the light had softened. Ethan looked across the ranch, past the crumbling fences and wild grass, and felt something stir, a purpose. Ruby had buried more than tools and memories. She'd buried a thread that led directly back to him. And for the first time in years, Ethan Walker didn't feel entirely lost. The road into Marble Creek shimmered under the afternoon sun, its cracked edges lined with prairie grass and wind-bent wildflowers. Ethan walked with a steady limp beside Valor, whose usual brisk pace had slowed to a cautious trot. The town appeared modest, nestled among low hills with red-roofed houses and a single main street lined with hand-painted shop signs. The kind of place that wore its years with quiet pride. The general store sat on the corner, weathered green siding, dusty windows, and a tin bell that jingled as Ethan pushed open the door. Inside, the air was cooler, tinged with the scent of dried herbs and old wood. Shelves stood slightly uneven, stocked with canned goods, faded labels, and handmade crafts. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a head of thick gray hair tied in a loose braid. Her name tag read, Linda. Her skin was sun-worn, and her hands bore the permanent lines of labor, but her eyes were alert, green and sharp with recognition. "You must be Ethan Walker," she said before he could speak. He paused. "How'd you—" "I'd know you anywhere," she smiled softly. "Ruby talked about you for years. Called you her unfinished chapter?" Ethan swallowed, the weight of Ruby's journal pressing heavier in his pack. Linda motioned for him to come closer and placed a basket on the counter. "She always hoped you'd come back," Linda continued, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Said you were a man who'd lost his way in war and might one day find himself again on that land." Ethan looked down at Valor, whose head now rested on his boot. "She wasn't wrong," Ethan said quietly. As he gathered supplies, water, jerky, antiseptic, dog food, Linda studied the German shepherd. "That limp's not just weariness," she noted. "There's a vet 2 blocks down, Doc Raymond. Kind soul, keeps chickens and quotes Shakespeare. I'll walk you." Outside, Linda walked slowly beside Ethan, waving at passing locals with the ease of someone woven into the fabric of the town. Along the way, she pointed out the old church, a closed library, and the diner where Ruby once sold preserves. "She never liked talking about the past," Linda admitted, "but you were the one name she never buried." They reached a low brick building with ivy climbing the corners and a wooden sign that read Raymond Veterinary Clinic. Inside, a thin man with wiry gray hair and a trimmed beard looked up from his clipboard. Dr. Jacob Raymond was in his early 70s, lean with long fingers and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He had the quiet demeanor of someone who listened more than he spoke. He approached Valor with a gentle touch and knelt slowly. "May I?" he asked Ethan. At his nod, Raymond examined the leg, probing near the paw and shoulder with professional care. "Nothing torn, but there's inflammation," he said. "Probably an old wound. Resurfacing. A few days rest, anti-inflammatory shots, and soft terrain. This dog's got heart." Ethan knelt beside Valor, brushing the dog's neck. "He's got more than that," he murmured. "He's the reason I keep moving." Linda placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ruby saw that in you, too." As they left the clinic with Valor already stepping a bit easier, Ethan glanced back at the quiet town. Marble Creek had welcomed him not with questions, but with memory, kindness, and a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. And for the first time, he wondered if Ruby's land was never meant to be a refuge, but a beginning. The morning light broke gently over the ridge, casting long shadows across the dry earth. Ethan stood alone beside the old well, a ring of stacked limestone worn smooth by time and weather. The map Valor had unearthed proved true. Each marker led him deeper into the past, and perhaps into something that resembled a future. He pulled back the overgrowth with calloused hands, revealing the mouth of the forgotten well, sealed with rusted planks and thick rope. The first few hours were spent hauling out debris and sweeping away the years of dirt. When the water finally glimmered at the bottom, cold, clear, and deep, he let out a low, disbelieving laugh. Valor, lying nearby under a patch of shade, thumped his tail slowly, his back leg still wrapped with a vet's compression bandage. Later that day, under the shade of a half-dead cedar tree, Ethan spotted the twisted branches of a gnarled apple tree. Its trunk was thick with age, bark splitting in deep furrows. A small rusted sign nailed. Into its base read Est. 1924. The tree was real, not a legend, not a memory. Its leaves were sparse but determined, clinging like stubborn echoes of those who'd once tended it. Near the tree, beneath a pile of collapsed fencing and wild brush, he found the final item the map had promised, an old tool shed sunken into the ground, almost fully buried. It took hours of digging, sweat, and blisters, but the effort was its own reward. Inside were hand tools, fencing wire, and a worn leather bag containing Ruby's folded letters and a lockbox filled with seeds wrapped in wax paper, each envelope labeled in neat cursive. Ruby had buried more than tools. She'd buried hope. On his third evening, Ethan discovered a small trailer half concealed behind a thicket of wild blackberry bushes. It was aluminum, dented in places, but surprisingly intact. The door creaked open to reveal a single bed, a stove, and cabinets lined with empty jars. A folded blanket still carried Ruby's scent, lavender and tobacco. He sat on the bed, overwhelmed not by sadness, but by the realization that someone had prepared all of this. For him, for whoever might carry the torch. Meanwhile, Valor's condition remained stable, though Dr. Raymond had confirmed it was likely a ligament injury from an old battlefield sprint. "It'll heal," he'd said, "but don't let him chase anything heavier than a shadow." Ethan had nodded solemnly, more determined than ever to build something worthy of the dog who never left his side. Wanting to afford Valor's medication and food, Ethan began accepting odd jobs around Marble Creek. He mended a chicken coop for the Wilsons, rebuilt a portion of the west fence for the local school, and even spent 2 mornings mucking out stables at the Fields Ranch. His hands grew tougher, his steps more certain, and slowly word spread in town, not just about the quiet man rebuilding the Dawson land, but the loyal dog who limped beside him and never barked. One evening, Linda stopped by the trailer with a box of canned peaches and fresh bandages. She said nothing at first, just watched Ethan repair the trailer's back steps with a calmness she hadn't seen in years. "You're doing more than rebuilding land," she finally said. "You're growing roots." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan believed her. Dust swirled in the late morning light as a dark green sedan creaked to a stop at the edge of the Dawson Ranch. Ethan stood still, one hand resting on the weathered fence post, his jaw tightening as 2 figures stepped out of the vehicle. The first was a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with slicked-back silver hair and a square jaw that seemed permanently clenched. His suit, though dusty from the road, was crisp, charcoal gray with sharp lapels, the kind of clothing worn by someone used to courtrooms more than cattle fields. This was Ronald Walker. His eyes, pale and calculating, scanned the property with thinly veiled disdain. Behind him followed a thin, balding man carrying a leather briefcase and blinking behind round spectacles. This was Mr. Carlton, Ronald's attorney, soft-spoken, polite, and forgettable in both voice and presence, save for the thick folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Ethan Walker," Ronald said, stepping forward without offering a hand. "You've been occupying property that may not be legally yours." Ethan's silence stretched as he studied Ronald's face. There was a resemblance, a vague echo of family through the hard brow and sharp cheekbones, but no warmth behind the eyes. Ronald continued, voice slick with authority. "You were named in a document written by a woman to whom you bear no blood relation. The law may see that as contestable." Mr. Carlton opened the folder, carefully retrieving a document Ethan recognized: Ruby's will. "If this is deemed invalid," Ronald said, "as the nearest living relative on your father's side, I am legally positioned to assume ownership or trusteeship of this land. You have 30 days to vacate." Valor, resting under the shade of the porch, growled low and deep. His bandaged leg twitched, and Ethan instinctively stepped between the dog and the strangers. "This land wasn't given out of obligation," Ethan said, voice low. "It was given out of trust." Ronald smiled faintly. "Then trust won't help you in court." That evening, Ethan sat with Linda inside the general store, the silence between them thick with unease. She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and slid one across to him. "He's bluffing," she said. "I knew Ruby for 20 years. She wasn't some senile recluse. She chose you, Ethan." Ethan nodded, though doubt lingered like smoke. Valor whimpered in his sleep nearby, his injured leg twitching again. The vet had warned him that overexertion would trigger relapses. Now, with a legal battle looming and Valor in pain, the weight of the moment crushed down harder than before. Word spread quickly in Marble Creek. By morning, a few townsfolk had shown up, one carrying a dusty photo of Ruby with young soldiers, another holding a copy of a journal entry she'd shared once in Sunday church. Slowly, the pieces began to form, not just of legal proof, but of a legacy lived and witnessed. Ethan wasn't just fighting for land. He was defending memory, kindness, and a promise made in silence. The legal battle ended not with thunder, but with quiet dignity. A county judge, after reviewing the stack of journal entries, testimonies from townsfolk, and the old photo of Ruby standing beside a wounded young Ethan in desert fatigues, declared the will valid. Ronald Walker's face barely flinched when the gavel dropped, but his lawyer's shoulders sank as if a verdict had struck bone. Ronald left Marble Creek that same afternoon, dust curling behind his tires like smoke from a fire that finally died. Ethan didn't celebrate. Instead, he returned to the ranch and began what he knew Ruby had hoped for, not ownership, but restoration. The old well was the first thing he brought back to life. He rebuilt the pulley with salvaged oak and wrapped the rope himself, hands steady despite the ache in his wrists. Days bled into weeks as he trimmed back thorn bushes around the property, reinforced the barn with fresh beams, and replanted the fence line. The apple tree, twisted, ancient, but still breathing, stood watch over it all. Ethan had built a bench beneath its low arms, carving RW into one side. There he often sat with Valor, who now moved with a slight limp but barked with the same fire. After a delicate surgery performed by Dr. Willa Harris, a tall, sharp-featured woman in her early 40s with deeply tanned skin and short-cropped black hair, Valor had regained most of his strength. Willa, quiet but fiercely compassionate, had served with the Army's Veterinary Corps before settling in Marble Creek. Her calm, confident presence made even the most battered animal trust again. It was Willa who suggested the name. Ruby Walker Sanctuary. "You've got land, tools, and 2 hands that don't know how to rest," she told Ethan, crossing her arms and giving him a rare half-smile. "You might as well make it count." So he did. Word spread, and soon the ranch became a place where broken horses found quiet, and broken veterans found work, purpose, and peace. A one-eyed palomino named Samson arrived first, followed by a nervous bay mare rescued from an abandoned rodeo lot. Ethan worked side by side with men and women like him, bruised by the world, but not beaten. There were no ceremonies, just labor, sweat, and healing. And then, one evening, as the sun spilled across the hill country in molten orange, Ethan stood at the edge of the pasture, Valor at his side. The fence was sturdy. The windmill spun slow. The barn door creaked with the weight of life, not loss. "This is hers," Ethan murmured. "But it's ours now, too." In that fading light, surrounded by breath and bark and the soft shuffle of hooves, Ethan realized he hadn't inherited land. He'd inherited hope. Sometimes God's greatest miracles come not as lightning bolts, but as second chances. Land restored, hearts healed, and loyal souls like valor by our side. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may the Lord bless and protect each of you watching this now.